When the weightlifting athletes compete, they compete with the weights according to their own capacity. Because a person, no matter how good a weightlifter he is, cannot lift more weight than he can carry. It seems that Putin, the Russian leader, has also taken a heavy burden but not been able to lift it. Russia can no longer bear the burden of war. A Russian MP made striking statements about the course of the war. Russia has suffered serious losses in terms of both human resources and equipment since the beginning of its invasion of Ukraine. The economic burden of the war is another problem for Russia. Moreover, the whole world has turned its back on Putin due to his aggressive attitude and expansionist policy. As such, it's become very difficult for Russia to continue this war. This difficulty is a result of defeat in the war so far. Even though Putin knows the devastation suffered by the Russian troops, he has no intention of withdrawing from the war. However, it is now clear that the war is not sustainable. Voices are being raised in Russia on this issue. One of them is Russian MP. So, what did the Russian MP say about the war? Who is the MP who made this statement? Konstantin Zatulin, who recently made a questioning statement about the goals of the war, became an agenda in the media after his statements. Konstantin Zatulin, a member of the Russian State Duma and the first deputy chairman of Russia's first Commonwealth of Independent States Committee, said that Moscow does not have a solid stance and ground in Ukraine. He also said that Russian army does not have sufficient grounds to win decisively under the current circumstances. Zatulin said that the Russian President Vladimir Putin has failed to achieve the goals he set in the ongoing war in Ukraine, which he launched in February last year. What were our goals officially declared at the beginning of the military operation? Zatulin asked. You all remember the Nazification, the demilitarization, the neutrality of Ukraine, and the protection of the inhabitants of Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic, who have suffered all this time. On which of these items have we achieved result to date? None. Zatulin also commented on Ukraine's neutrality and impartiality in international affairs. As a report on the war published in March, he suggested, according to the Russian MP, there can be no talk of Ukraine's neutrality anymore, and Putin has not achieved what he sent out to do in the war. On the contrary, Ukraine has clearly sided with NATO. Moreover, some of them objectives have ceased to have any meaning. For example, neutrality of Ukraine. What is the meaning of these requirements? None at the moment. Zatulin said it will no longer be neutral if it continues to exist. And now the question, since it has already been said here that the statehood of Ukraine no longer exists, will Ukraine under the leadership of President Vladimir Zelensky or his successors exist as a result of everything or not? Zatulin's remarks revealed a disappointment in Russia's war aim. It is clear from Zatulin's words that they have painfully realized that there is no longer any possibility for the Ukrainian state to be in Russia's sphere of influence. Zatulin's statements become a hot topic on social media. While Zatulin was making these statements, the Ukrainian army continued its operation against the Russian army. In addition, the repelling the attacks of the Russian army, the Ukrainian army, which attacked the Russian positions, again inflicted serious losses on Russian troops. In the latest operations, Russian invaders suffered many personal losses, as well as tanks and armored vehicles losses. Here is the latest situation of Russian invaders. Ukrainian army carried out an operation against Russian troops in the occupied region. In Zaporizhia, 2 Ukrainian tanks defeated 3 Russian tanks. The massive operation of the Ukrainian army tanks was recorded by drones. In many images published on social media, a breathtaking tank battle was displayed. The moment of the Ukrainian tanks firing was reflected on the cameras while the smoke was all around in the field. During the clash in the open terrain, the moment of the shot from Ukrainian tanks was reflected in these images, while the hit Russian tank was destroyed. The footage of the Ukrainian army's operations against Russian tanks with the BGM-75 TOW missiles breaks the click records on social media. The footage shows Ukrainian forces targeting Russian T-72 tanks with the TOW missiles. The attack with TOW were not limited to tanks. Images of operations organized by the Ukrainian forces against Russian military shipped with TOW missiles integrated into a small boat were shared on social media. In the footage, the TOW missile carried by a small boat can be seen firing accurately at small attack boats used by the Russian armed forces and identified as Raptor. This was not the only attack of the Ukrainian army against the Russian Navy in recent days. The Ukrainian army, which is preparing a strategic counterattack, is also targeting Russian ships in the ports in the occupied territories. In the past day, successive attacks occurred in the port where Russian ships were anchored in Berdyansk. It was previously reported by the news services that the port was hit by Storm Shadow missiles and a large explosion occurred after the attacks targeting the fuel tanker. Ukrainian missiles hit the Russian ship in the same port again. It was reported that 2 Raputa-class landing ships of the Russian Navy were affected by missiles attack. According to the reports, the Ukrainian military targeted the Russian ships using OTR-21 Tochka ballistic missiles. After the ships were blown up by the missile attack in the harbor, a huge smoke surrounded the area. It is stated that other ships nearby also felt the attack. Apart from the ships hit in attack, many Russian soldiers were also neutralized. While the Ukrainian army continues to fight against the Russian invaders, the Free Russian Legion and Russian volunteer units are striking a blow against the Russian army in Russia. Clashes between partisan groups and Russian army continues in the Belgrade region. It was announced that the Ukrainian-backed partisans who took control of some settlements in Belgrade region last week destroyed armored vehicles and tanks belonging to the Russian army last day. While the Russians are losing on every front, they are now being hit at home. Images of the tanks blown up by the Free Russian Legion were shared. How the targets were destroyed in night operation of the Legion's drone operation was recorded in seconds. Here are the details of the night raid with drones. The Free Russian Legion and Russian volunteer corps has rebelled against Putin's repressive regime, saying that Ukraine's freedom is necessary for Russia's freedom. The partisans, who have been pro-Ukrainian since the beginning of the war, oppose Putin's regime for taking their country to war for its own ambitions and interests. The Free Russian Legion and Russian volunteer corps were formed for this purpose, to rise up against the Russian leader Putin. Arguing that Ukraine's freedom was the first priority for their country, nationalist Russians rolled up their sleeves and joined the war alongside the Ukrainian army, as there was no more space for civilian struggle against Putin within Russia. At this point, partisan groups are now in Russia. The partisans, who caused the war to move beyond Russia's border, are quite successful in Belgrade region. Drones operations of Free Russian Legion organized an operation against Russian troops last night. It was announced that 2 Russian tanks, one BMP-3 and one BRDM, were destroyed near Shebekino. Videos of the moment the tanks and the vehicles were blown up were shared on social media. At this point, the Russians have lost 210,350 soldiers, 3,848 tanks, 7,523 armored combat vehicles, 3,562 artillery systems, 584 reactive volley fire systems, 313 aircraft, 349 air defense systems, 298 helicopters, 6,312 automotive and tanks equipments, 18 ships, 1,136 cruise missiles, 3,189 UAVs, 4 operational tactical missile systems. Is Russia on the verge of giving up? Do you think Putin will be left alone as the one who wants war in Russia? What do you think about the course of the war? We look forward to your comments. Follow us to be informed about the developments.